Hello everyone, my name is Boulevard, and today I just want to touch base. You know, with the patch happening last Wednesday, you have a 10-day cycle from the patch to the seasonal, and on day 6, so Tuesday, is around when I lock in all of the information for Tournament Tactician, and with how rapidly evolving the meta is, there's a lot that can get missed in that Wednesday to Friday, that day 7 to day 9 sort of area. So here on day 9, I just want to come in and touch base with you, let you know my final thoughts on everything, where I stand on all of these decks, what I expect to see out of Top Cut, and just come in as an unbiased third party, and who's not privy to your testing or any of these things. A little bit more stats-oriented, and just kind of let you know how I feel about everything. So Fiora Pantheon, the most popular ladder deck. I expect this to be the number 2 deck at the seasonal, but honestly, I wouldn't be that surprised if it was number 1. I don't think Nami is actually going to be as popular as people expect it to be, and maybe it just won't be as popular in Swiss, but it'll still have that high top 32 representation. Unfortunately, that's not something that I can really find stats on, and that's just kind of too much to get into right now when I'm just trying to give you a quick touch base, but Fiora Pantheon, very solid deck, the round out of a lot of people's lineups, easily the number 2 deck of the format, if we're not counting Lee Sin Auction, because it's going to be combined with Nami for a lot of players. And really just a very solid third deck that a lot of people are going to be on. It's hard to target, it's very proactive, a lot of Spell Shield gives you good matchups into Control, while Fiora just gives you good matchups into sort of the weenie decks or other board-based decks. You know, you have the barrier on both Pantheon and Golden Aegis, and of course Fiora Spell Riposte, giving you that extra little bit. So really you just kind of have all of your bases covered, and a lot of it is just the Darken Lodestone is an extremely good card, and it didn't really have a home before Fiora Pantheon, so now Harazi gets to come in and take over games with its insane ability, and the Darken Lodestone itself just being a good weapon. Fiora Pantheon, I'm feeling 14 to 18 in Top Cut, and it could actually be a little bit higher than that, but I really wouldn't expect it to be lower. This one is on everybody's radar. It's a very high opinion of it, warranted. Lee Sin Nami TF, I have so many questions about how many players are actually going to split the Lee Sin away from the Nami. There's been a lot of discussion about when you get to Top Cut, are you still banning the Nami deck or are you banning the Lee Sin deck? If they are split up, and it seems like a lot of players are starting to get of the opinion that like in the Swiss rounds, you ban Nami, and then in Top Cut, maybe you ban Lee Sin. Maybe even in Swiss, you ban the Lee Sin, because most often it is going to be paired with the Nami. Obviously, this is the best deck in the game. The ladder representation not really showing that. I mean, the win rate's higher, right? The play rate's not as high, but the win rate is higher because people aren't really tryharding as much the last 2 days because cutoff already happened. But in terms of how many I expect in the top 32, one of the questions that I always ask myself when I see the number 1 deck is it going to break 20? Most of the time, everybody says, yes, obviously the best deck is going to break 20. Everybody should be bringing this, and yet it almost never does. Kai'Sa did. Kai'Sa got to 24, and that was the most that we've ever seen of a best deck in the top 32, in the Americas at least. I think that was tied with Nasus, or Nasus Thresh even had more in EU, or EMEA rather. And I think that Kai'Sa was an easy deck to play in terms of just you curve out, you play the Kai'Sa, a lot of decks can't handle that. You also have 6 copies of Kai'Sa, as a lot of players were playing mono, and you have those 3 copies of Rite of Calling. So with Nami, if you don't draw the Nami, a lot of players don't understand how to play the deck, or maybe they draw the Lee Sin and that's enough to get them through it, but for the most part, I think that your average player just is going to stray away from the Nami, and they didn't stray away from the Kai'Sa, right? They knew that that was good, they knew how to play it. What I'm trying to get at here is that Nami, like Thralls, typically is played less than it should be, and so I don't expect Nami to break 20. Now, it could be that all the good players are on Nami, all the good players Top Cut, because we're all tryharding, it's just before Worlds, and that inflates it. But I think that if you look at Nami's Swiss play rate comparable to Kai'Sa's Swiss play rate, Nami's going to be significantly lower. So for Top Cut, I'm expecting less than 20 on the Nami, and that's about as specific as I can really get, especially when I'm throwing out numbers like 14 to 18 for the Fiora Pantheon. I'm feeling at least 17 on the Nami, but I would be a little surprised if it went above 20. I would be very surprised if it beat Kai'Sa's record or tied with it and went, 24 plus. Because you have to think about, like, Winding Light, right? That was another very popular deck. Obviously, like, wasn't as close to tier 0 as the Nami is. I don't believe Nami is tier 0 for the record, just to throw that out there. And Winding Light only had, like, 18 players in the Top Cut. It was a little bit more targetable. We're not going to see as many players targeting the Nami because targeting Nami looks a little bit weird, but whether you go on the ban Nami or ban Lee Sin train, I don't really care. And just to get my Lee Sin numbers out there, I've talked about this on Tournament Tactician. I have no baseline for understanding how popular Auction Lee Sin is going to be into Top Cut because I do not know how many players want to split the Lee Sin from the Nami. I would split the Lee Sin from the Nami, but Lee Sin Auction is also probably my most played deck this season, so that's why I'd be doing it, right? I don't think you need to run Nami and Lee Sin separately in your lineup. I don't think that's mandatory at all. I don't even think it's necessarily mandatory to run Nami in your lineup, because if you are expecting it to just get banned every time anyway, then you can go ahead and run Fiora Pantheon and a Swain deck and whatever other Heimer Jace or whatever third deck you want. Obviously, I hope that you care a little bit more about your lineup composition than the 3 random decks that I just picked off the top of my head and threw at you, but some people don't, and they top anyway, which is why I always say that, it's more important and less important than you kind of give it credit for. Now, getting into the Swain decks, the stats on Swain Twisted Fate are so bad. This deck just loses to everything on paper. Nora Swain is at least like the Nora half of your deck beats things and the Swain half of your deck beats things. And, if you draw the right half, then you beat everything. And if you draw the wrong half, then you lose to everything. I'm not really a fan of either of these Swain decks. I feel like there is something better out there. I don't know what it is, but that's just kind of the feeling that I get. And every time that I've kind of had that feeling in the past, usually given enough time, someone has found what I've been looking for. That's not really the case here. That's not something we can wait for. What I will say is that, when I was talking about Yasuo Katarina and how that looks really good into Nami and Lee Sin and Fiora Pantheon, obviously one of the first things that I thought of, like everyone, is, hey, what about Yasuo Swain? It was a pretty good deck back in the Targon era, and Swain just got a big buff, so why don't we play that instead of Katarina? We already want to be playing Ravenous Flock, I don't know if Yasuo level up, or if Yasuo's strike effect actually contributes to Swain's level up. Single combat does, so I'm inclined to say that it does, but it's just a little bit too clunky at that point. You are definitely losing even more to the Nora decks than you were previously, because the Aloof Travelers and the Minimorphs just playing double duty against you, and Katarina just adds so much to the Yasuo package, not just with the Blade's Edge that you're getting, but also that attack token plus Windswept Hillock combo. So I do not recommend trying the Yasuo Swain. Everybody that I've seen try it and have the same sort of level 1 thought as I did was just like, okay, yeah, this isn't it. We need to go back to the Katarina. So Swain I'm not big on. Obviously, it's going to be a good deck. It might even end up being the number 3 deck, and I'm not happy about that. So I kind of expect that one to have a much lower representation if it is the number 3 deck. So much like, again, the Curious Journey seasonal where we had Aphelios and Pantheon, those were up at the top. Those were, I believe, close to 14 apiece or something. It wasn't as high as I expected. And then Talia Ziggs, yeah, that's what it was. It was Talia Ziggs at the time was 9 or less than 10 or something. I kind of expect the same thing out of Swain. So in terms of numbers, just to reiterate here, because I've talked in circles here, Fiora Pantheon, I expect to be the number 2 deck at 14 to 18. Nami, just Nami, Ionia baseline, I expect to be the number 1 deck with less than 20. Swain, one of these versions of Swain, probably Nora Swain, I expect to be the number 3 deck with probably only about 11, maybe 12. I'm expecting a pretty big fall off between our 1, 2, and our 3 here. Getting to Karma Master Yi, the stats say it's bad, the good players say it's good, the people that know how to play it say it's good. My recommendation is that if you are playing a lot of Karma Yi and you're having an okay time, or maybe you're kind of on the fence about it, I suggest giving Heimer Jace more of a shot for the open rounds. It just feels a little bit safer. You get to be a little bit more proactive in your game plan, and when you're going into an open field, I'm always going to recommend proactivity, because one of the things that trips people up a lot is you are not going to play against the meta 9 rounds in a row, right? Your opponents are going to bring some random shit sometimes, and when you get to facilitate your own game plan rather than reacting to whatever unknown nonsense they're about to do, you generally end up having a better time. So I can't recommend Karma Yi for the Swiss rounds, but I do think we'll see a resurgence of it in Top Cut. In terms of what I expect to be the number 4 deck, honestly, I don't know, because it could be Akshan Lee Sin, it could be the other Swain variant, it could be Karma Yi, it could be Jace Heimer. I don't really know. Getting down here, Poppy Taric, people are going to be on this, but not really much. I expect this to only be a 4 or 5 of. Annie Jin, this one I do want to talk about, because I've had people ask me oh, why isn't Annie Jin on the tier list? I thought it kind of sucked. I still think it sucks for what it's worth. Looking at its stats, it is beating Swain and Fiora Pantheon. In fact, a lineup that looks very good into both every Swain variant and Fiora Pantheon is Annie Jin, Akshan Pantheon, and Nami Lee Sin. That lineup, good into Swain and Fiora. And you're expecting pretty much everybody to have at least one of those decks in their lineup, right? They're just so generic that you can really fit them into anything. There's not really an aggro lineup that's running around. I've seen people talk about Annie Jin Mist Rates X, but again, they cannot really find the X. Probably Red Gwen would have to be it. It is what it is. I don't really expect that lineup to do anything, but I'll get into that in a second. But what I want to say about Annie Jin is that I can see how it beats the Fiora Pantheon. I'm still not in love with it as a Swiss deck. I just think that its power level is too low. I think it's a little bit too specific. And if you do run into people not running that Fiora Pantheon, then you are going to run into some issues. The other thing that I want to say about Annie Jin is, while I've heard a lot of players talk it up as hey, this is a great counter pick, we are very close to the seasonal. A lot of players have started tweeting their lineups or talking about it in Discord. I have not seen a player whose name I recognize put Annie Jin in their lineup. So I think that everyone's just kind of talking about it, but nobody's really being about it when it comes to Annie Jin, and honestly, I'm fine with that, because again, I don't really respect this deck. Now, Red Gwen, again, back up to a 55% win rate, as is, I would imagine, Sejuani Gwen, but I don't know if we're going to get that far down here before I run out of decks that I really want to talk about. And yeah, we've seen some players cut this down to just Gwen Katarina. I think most players are on just Gwen Katarina now, cutting the Elise, and if, you look at the Fearsome deck that is Elise Nocturne, you cannot run Fearsome as Shadow Isle and Noxus as well as the Red Gwen, which I don't think is that big of a deal, because Precious Pet, not that bad of a cut if it means you get to put Red Gwen in your lineup, and there are other options that you have. But I like Red Gwen. I think that it's a very solid deck. It's the closest thing that we have to an aggro deck outside of Annie Jin, but again, I haven't really seen people actually playing Annie Jin. So that just kind of is what it is. But Red Gwen I'm pretty big on. I don't think this deck is going to be as big as it should be. I was really hype on it last seasonal as well, and we only put like 6 or 7 of them in Top Cut. I think we'll have a little bit more than that this time around. I could see as high as like 8 or 9. I don't think it's going to like break into the top 5 or anything, unless, we just have like too big of a split on the Swain, like too big of a split on the Nami and the Lee or something like that, that we're just not getting... like we just have really low numbers overall. That's the only way I really see Red Gwen getting into the top 5. But ultimately, I like the deck. I like its proactive strategy. Yeah, it took the nerf on the Harrowing. You've got a few options on how you want to play this one, and that's something that I like, is you can really flex it to your style. Like, are you playing the Ravenous Flocks? Are you playing Quietus? Are you going for a little bit more control-y into the Harrowing finish? And ultimately, like, Ruined Reckoner is still just a very powerful card, especially with all of the stun effects that we have running around rather than recall effects. For example, everybody is running Concussive Palm. You're not seeing a lot of Will of Ionia in these Ionia decks, and honestly, I think Will of Ionia is in a great place right now, which is part of the reason that I'm so big on the Yasuo Katarina. Just Will of Ionia being, a potential removal spell, and that shoring up your poor Swain matchup a little bit for the Yasuo Katarina specifically. Ultimately, yeah, I'm big on Will right now, and Red Gwen doesn't deal with that very well, or it doesn't deal with that as well as they deal with like Concussive Palm per se, and it's just kind of a weak point in the meta that maybe it's not a weak enough point for you to really exploit that with the Red Gwen, but it is something that does play into your favor. Nora SI, I'm not a big fan of right now. I've never really been a big fan of. I liked the Heimer more than I liked the Vygar, but I don't like these decks, is really all I can say about it. I've never really liked them. I haven't really struggled with them too much on ladder, so like my personal bias plays in very heavily here, and that just kind of is what it is, right? This is just like my final thoughts touch base. Hey, Boulevard shits on SI Nora on ladder, so he doesn't like it. That's the final thought, right? Mist rates, I've seen a lot of people talk about their matchup charts look good into some of the top decks and very poor into others. I think that because you are, if I remember correctly, losing to Fiora Pantheon, it's not a good look. Right? It's just not a good look. I like the concept, I like the energy, but I just don't think the pieces are really there. Heimer Jace, very solid, safe option again. This has just been like slowly one of the best comfort decks for the last few seasonals, and that's kind of where I put it at now. Akshan Pantheon, this is the counter pick to apparently Swain and Fiora Pantheon. It's one of the only counter picks to Fiora Pantheon, and I just kind of wanted to shout that out. I don't understand this deck really. I haven't played it. I haven't really... Oh, actually, no. So I did play it, but it was like an original build where I was just like, yeah, this sounds good to me. Let me run it for a few games on ladder during the season, but I didn't like... No one else was really on it at the time, so I don't even remember what my build looked like. It probably didn't look like this. At least not much. Okay, I was running a lot of Heedless Resurrection. I've been really big on Heedless Resurrection since it came out, but I don't think I was on the Darkened Lodestone. I think I was just on Darkened Bloodletters. Like, this was before Lodestone was really something that I was like, okay, yeah, this is like a cracked card. So my build was definitely suboptimal, but I was still like doing fine with it. It didn't really feel like anything was there. I felt like I was just kind of high rolling. I only played like maybe 5 games with it before I put it down, but I don't think it's bad, man. I think that, this is something that you could see in, like I said, the Nami Lee Sin, the Akshan Pantheon, and the Annie Jin. I'm not big on Annie Jin, but I'm sure you could find a third deck instead. It does take Akshan Lee out of your pool, but again, if you are planning on running the Lee Sin Nami anyway, then you didn't really care. But ultimately, yeah, this is like a cool counter pick. I don't know how many people are actually going to be on it. Even on ladder, there's only 180 players between the 3 servers playing it over the last couple of days, and it might just be one of those things that's not refined enough. I mean, these lists look fine, like they probably could be a little better, but maybe not by much, and maybe it just comes down to, did you find the right build in the right amount of time in order to put this in your lineup? I don't necessarily like it more than Fiora Pantheon, because I really like Fiora Pantheon, but yeah, you know, it's not a bad option. I certainly wouldn't fault anyone who, like, came to me and had this in their lineup. Like, if I see Annie Jin in your lineup, I'm probably going to try to talk you out of it. I wouldn't try to talk you out of Akshan Pantheon in the same way, I guess, is, like, kind of where I wanted to get at with that one. Lurk, never respect this deck. Plunder, dog shit matchup charts. Nasus, off a cliff. L, Ratio. Where's the deck I want to talk about? Where are you, Yasuo, Katarina? There you are, 55% win rate, going strong, 113 players, there we go, baby. So like I said earlier in the Tournament Tactician, I don't really like the builds that I'm seeing. I don't like Spellslinger, I don't really like Strategic Execution, and what you're getting out of Strategic Execution, in my opinion, is you look at your deck and you're like, okay, yeah, like, I have a very singular win condition. If I don't draw Yasuo or Katarina, then, like, my deck kind of sucks, so I need this other win condition in here. So I feel like most of the time they end up playing this as a Legion General, unless they draw it while they have the Yasuo. I just really haven't had that issue. Like, yeah, you don't, like, you have a hard time winning if you don't draw your champions. Just like every other fucking deck in Legends of Runeterra. Put more Whispered Words in there and draw your fucking champion. Now, the one thing that I do actually want to talk about in a serious manner is the one of Might, because I don't run this. I've seen people run it, and I get it. Like, obviously, Fey Blade Twirler can get very big, and it's not just as much. It's not just about, okay, yeah, I can push through the Cheese Lethal with Might. It is making your opponent respect the Cheese Lethal with Might. And, you know, when they're lining up their chump block onto the Fate Blade Twirler, they go, oh crap, like, maybe I do have to sacrifice a stronger unit to not die to Might here. Because, like, yeah, you know, like, I can line it up, and then, like, they can Might, and I can Palm, but if they have Deny, then I just lose. And that's something that a lot of players are not, like, that's just something they need to be aware of, and it's going to bite them in the ass a few times. I actually really like more Ionia Tellstones, mostly because I think Health Pot is a very powerful tool in this meta against all of the Ravenous locks that you're running into. Like, even if you end up playing a Katarina Yasuo, well, especially if you end up playing a Katarina Yasuo Amir, they really don't have a way to re-damage your unit in response to your Health Pot. And if you're playing against Swain Nora, again, they don't really have that many ways to re-damage your unit. If they had to, like, well, no, that's Swain, hold on. So, like, if you go to hit my unit and I heal it, you might end up having to use, like, a wallop on it. Because I'm expecting you to, like, fire off your group shots and your Pokesticks pretty early on to, like, push damage onto it. It kind of depends on what the target is. But I have just found myself against Swain decks using that Health Pot line pretty often to dodge a Ravenous Flock. And it works out more often than you would expect it to. Or at the very least, you're getting additional resources out of your opponent for a pretty low cost here. And you're just getting one more removal spell out of their hand, which is good because, again, you are a deck that is actually pretty light on threats. Now, would I recommend Katarina Yasuo? I'm not confident enough in it to say, like, yeah, absolutely. I will say that, like, the charts look good. I've been playing it. I've been feeling good about it. Vestayan Disciple is just, like, one of the best cards in the game. If you can get that down, protect it, which you can because you're Ionia, because this card is Ionia, you just kind of tend to run away with the game. Like, there's really not a lot of Noxus in here. As you can see, like, it's just Katarina, Ravenous Flock, Arachnoid Sentry, Whispered Words. I do like Will of Ionia in the deck a lot. That is something that I've been really big on. And don't forget that you can Homecoming your Windswept Hillock. That's like a line of play that is actually pretty cracked, and one of the reasons that I like more Tellstones. I think a lot of the players that have come around to the Yasuo Katarina are taking Jay Sensational's build, who is actually not on the Runeterra AR list. I think his list looks more like this one, but not exactly like this one. But I do remember him specifically having in the Thorn of the Rose and the One of Might were the things that kind of, like, stood out to me. But yeah, at this point, you should know whether or not you like Yasuo Katarina, but you probably, like, there is a good chance that you play against this at least once in your 9 rounds, and you might end up losing to it. And then, you know, we just get down into the dredges of Society Scouts, the leftover Demacia decks that are fine if you're looking to target Misfortune. I don't really recommend them. And then I've seen a lot of players putting the One of Yumi into the Pantheon lists. Like, I don't really have an opinion on this. I think it's fine. You're still the same deck, more or less. Fiora's Champion spell is good enough that I'm fine loading up on the 3 copies of Fiora. If anything, I'd actually go down on Pantheon, because maybe I'm doing this wrong, but I've been winning with it, so it's kind of hard for me to, like, objectively notice that, is I've been throwing down unleveled Pantheons a lot more often, and just being like, hey, here's my unit with Barrier for the turn, let me hit you with it, or let me, like, you know, start to ramp it up with, like, a weapon, or I'll just, like, pale it randomly. Mostly because with Scout being removed from the pool, and with the lack of Zenith Bleed to turn my other units into threats, like, Pantheon just doesn't feel like the win condition anymore. I'm more for, like, in terms of win cons, I'm looking more at, like, Harazi and Camp for the Doubt. So I'm fine to just sort of play resource games with my Pantheon. It's something that I do a lot with Swain as well. Like, not so much since Swain got buffed, but previously with like old Twisted Fate Swain or something along those lines, or like old Nar Swain, I would play with the health of my Swain as a resource. Like, I would just use him as a blocker, or like to just come out and 2-for-1 my opponent and be like, hey, I attacked into your Fearsome blocker. I'm going to do it again next turn. You have to 2-for-1 on my Swain, which in a Swain deck, not a bad way to win the game. Not so much in this deck, but I think the Pantheon you're going to find can get a little bit more than a 2-for-1, right? You can get a little bit more out of your opponent than that, especially as you're pumping these resources into it. It's just this good overwhelm unit that's going to chip away at your opponent little by little. But yeah, I just wanted to point out that I've found myself playing unleveled Pantheon a lot more often than I have in previous iterations of Pantheon, and it's been working out for me. But yeah, that's kind of... I think that's really kind of everything I wanted to talk about and touch base on. But yeah, anyway, that is going to do it for me. I will be casting the top 32 of the seasonal, as you saw. I will be on there with Skarzig, Monte Cristo, and Sparkling Iced Tea, as well as Casanova on the host. So I'm very excited for that. And yeah, it's going to be a good time. Good luck to everybody participating, and those are sort of my final thoughts.